All right, and I think we are live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very special event with Buffalo Street Books. My name is Isabella, and I'm a children's bookseller and events coordinator.
Oh no.
We have had technical difficulties. So here, we see you moving again, Isabella.
Am I moving again? Okay, I will try it on my phone as well. But yeah, I don't know what's going on. But I'm so glad to have Maya-Callen back with us, who is the author of A Breath Too Late. But it's one of my very favorite books, and we were lucky enough to have Rocky with us for an event earlier this year, closer to when the book came out. And this book deals with a lot of really hard-hitting social issues, including mental health, suicide, and domestic violence. So we're here today to have a discussion in solidarity with domestic not again, some very hard-hitting subjects. And I'm so glad to have the Advocacy Center that serves Ithaca and the Tompkins County area here with us for the discussion today as well. So I'm going to have all of you introduce yourselves.
Maybe we should, Rocky, do you want to start?
Sure. So I'm very happy to be back with Buffalo Street Books and the Advocacy Center. I feel like it's been they were one of the first booksellers to support A Breath Too Late. I was so grateful for that. So like Isabella said, my name's Maya-Callen. My book is A Breath Too Late. And today I'm also joined by my sister.
Hello, everyone. My name is Martina Maya-Callen. I am this wonderful author's sister, and I am a victim advocate at an emergency safe house. And the populations that we serve are survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking. So I'm very happy to be a part of this conversation today.
Yeah. Andrea, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Andrea Champlin. I'm the lead youth services advocate at the Advocacy Center of Tompkins County. As Isabella said, we provide support services for survivors of domestic and sexual violence and anyone else impacted by it.
Yeah, and I'm Lynn Stack. I'm the youth education coordinator, and I was lucky enough to get to talk with Rocky and Isabella about A Breath Too Late last spring, along with Leah, who was one of our youth interns at the time, who's now in college. And Martina, I'm so excited that you're getting to join us for this conversation. I think today, certainly, Rocky, I feel like your book really, was focused for me on the impact of domestic violence on the teen who was the main character, but also on everyone else in the story in different ways. So I'm excited to sort of bring the book into the bigger context of Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And for those who don't know, October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and this is a time really to just raise awareness and maybe increase people's knowledge about domestic violence. The first day of unity for domestic violence was in 1981. And I think then and now, like, there were kind of three purposes that like the national coalition said they had, which were to mourn and remember those who have died because of domestic violence, and to celebrate the stories of those who have survived, and to really come together to talk about and work to end the violence that continues to impact so many people even on to today. So so I'm really glad that we're here to talk about this, both the book and just the topic of domestic violence. I thought I might toss a question out to get us started, and then we're just kind of to have more of a sort of discussion. But one of the things that was in the book, A Breath Too Late, that I think was maybe some of the ways in which we underestimate how aware children and even teens are of the violence that's happening between adults in the household and the impact that violence can have on the youth who are living with it. And so I wanted to just kind of open up some discussion about maybe like if we phrase it as a myth, this idea that like, oh, well, the kids aren't aware of what's happening. And to talk about the reality that, in fact, children and teens are often much more aware of what's happening than people want to believe, and that domestic violence really does impact everyone in a household, in a family, and sometimes even other people in the community. So,
absolutely.
Open the floor.
I mean, one of the things that you mentioned is in A Breath Too Late that, Ellie is the daughter of a woman who is in a domestically violent relationship. And you can see in certain scenes how the mother's trying to shield some of that away from Ellie. But inevitably, there is always crossover. There's always impact. And I think one of the biggest things about having this conversation is really getting into the nuances of it. Because when a family can escape a domestically violent situation, it truly is every member of that family that has been impacted and that will need to be seen as a survivor that they are.
Yeah.
Even if I feel like the partnered violence is the violence itself doesn't impact the children, that it still does. Like, even if the children don't have bruises on their body, there still is impact. And especially how when young people are developing, all of that goes into their development and their conditioning and their behavior. And so we have to reframe things moving forward. And so counseling and resources are so necessary. And Martina and I are daughters of domestic violence. And we have seen not only what we have kept silent and the shame that we have held on to for a long time, and then the massive healing that comes from finally being able to acknowledge it, and how that trauma can translate into so many other different things. So that trauma translated to, for me, my mental health deteriorating. I don't know if you want to comment on that for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it was really interesting, and even just sharing this event, like earlier today, I was sharing this event and talking about my excitement for this event, and I was typing out the sentence, like, I'm so excited to be talking about this topic because I am a survivor of domestic violence, and I just looked at that sentence and hesitated, because there's such a stigma on, like, oh, it's almost like that whole letting a cat out of the bag. And it's like when you're continuously trying to advocate and work towards spreading awareness, but at the same time, that vulnerability of sharing your story. But the thing is that through sharing stories, you learn that this is happening to our neighbors, this is happening to our best friends, these are happening to our loved ones. And so there's such power in stories, but sometimes in recognizing your own, it's hard to navigate that.
Yeah, there's so many threads to what you've just said, and one, I think, the silence that happens, and both the way that the cultural stigma that makes it feel like, and I know one of the events that we do during October is we have a collection of Clothesline Project t-shirts, and the Clothesline Project is now a global really art exhibit that where people write their own story or put pieces of their own story onto T-shirts, and we display them on Clothesline with the original idea being like, it's kind of like airing the dirty laundry of someone's life or of a family, the things that happen behind closed doors that we often are told we're just socially not allowed to talk about, but sometimes also really directly told you cannot tell anybody about what's happening, or that people don't want to hear it, that they don't listen when maybe people try to talk about their experiences.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
First, I hope you can hear me. I moved to my phone, so I feel like
Yeah,
I'm not looking.
Here and
I'm not looking in the right spot. So I feel like I'm not looking in the right spot. The camera's like over here instead of up here. But yeah, and that's one of my favorite things about the book is the way that it shows the impact that it has. I mean, Ellie is abused by her father as well, but her mother, in a sense, sort of steps in and will be like, go upstairs, the way that she sort of steps in, and you see the effect that it still has on Ellie. And being someone who studies film, I was thinking a lot about Big Little Lies when I was reading this book, and it seems funny to just not funny, it seems weird to bring in a TV show when we're reading a book, but what really struck me was how the main character, Celeste, who is living with domestic violence, is meeting with the therapist and saying, "Oh, he never hurts the boys don't know what's happening." And the therapist is like, "I promise you they do. I promise you they know exactly what's happening." And then you go along and you find out that the boys do know what's happening, that they hear it. And then it's impacted the way that they behave. And so I think that that's just something that I think a lot of people just kind of disregard or don't even know to think about, that it not only affects your home life, but it also affects the way in which you compose yourself and can behave in public. And I think it's wonderful the way that you've touched upon that issue.
And I love how you bring up how it impacts a child's development, right? This is something I see all the time with my youth clients. I think a common one that we hear is that, kids that are, raised and there's domestic violence, they might go on to be in relationships where there's domestic violence, or they themselves could become abusive people, less likely. But I think that those things certainly can be true. And I think it also can be a little short-sighted when we just think of that, because it's so pervasive and it affects every aspect. Kids are just little sponges and they're learning everything. So when that's going on in their learning environment, those are the experiences that they're learning from. So I just really appreciate how well you've encapsulated that.
I think that it's so, even just going around with what everyone commented and about their perspective and bringing it to the forefront of airing the dirty laundry, seeing how young boys observe and then behave, and then talking about development. I feel like children, as a mother myself, and then having very difficult conversations. After A Breath Too Late was published, my mom read The Ark, and she came up to me and she said, "If I had read this book when I was in that situation, I would have left so much sooner." And it was this beautiful moment where she came to my house, she knocked on the door, I opened the door, and she just hugged me and started crying. And we together were able to process so many memories that we had suppressed. And I think that part of the silence, it's a cultural stigma, but there's also this silence in households. There's the secrets kept from each other. And one of the things I really wanted to show in Wrath was, if Ellie and her mother had kept less secrets from each other, if they had opened up to each other, then they could have saved each other. They could have figured out a way. Ellie would have known her mother's pain. Her mother would have known how Ellie was suffering. And so I think that one of the most influential, impactful ways to break this silence is, one, to acknowledge everything that we experience ourselves, but then to also bring it into our families and to have those conversations. When our experience became known to our extended family, it was a shock. And then beyond, it's this continual confrontation with reality. And so I think the more that we open up these conversations on an intimate level, the bigger the conversations can be on a community level and beyond, because it requires that vulnerability. And I think that that's why these conversations are so important.
Yeah. I know there are two things that we talked about wanting to bring up, and I think they're both in what you just said. And one is, which maybe we can wait a minute and come back to, but one is the way in which being able to talk about what we've experienced helps us recover from the trauma, and I guess also sort of healing those relationships. I feel like isolation is one of the like really is a part of the violence of domestic violence, right? And so being able to break out of that isolation by sharing our stories and really connecting with people. But the other piece is that the silence and the isolation plays a part in, I think often in people not being sure what their options are, and maybe feeling trapped. And we often culturally hear this as like, well, why didn't the person, like if it was really bad, they would have left. But we know that actually there's a lot more going on than just it wasn't bad enough yet. That, that's definitely a myth. And so I wanted to just talk for a minute about like, so, what are some of the factors in somebody's trying to decide to leave, or how to go about doing that safely?
Martina brought up a really important statistic, and that how many times does a person have to cry? Yeah, it's like approximately 8 times before an individual actually leave. And that's like leaving and then leaving. And so it's like this cycle, because when you're talking about domestic violence, you're thinking of your home. Like, this is an individual that you decided to create a life with. This is your house, potentially your card. This is the person who has your social security card. Like, people will take out all the money and make it so that people don't have bank accounts. They'll take all their IDs so that they can't get jobs. They'll hide these things. They'll sabotage. They'll do sabotage reproductive justice. Like, there's like so many entanglements within domestic violence that it isn't just leaving. It is truly leaving everything that you've ever known. And if you've kept this a secret, then nobody knows what you're going through. And so you, one, have to tell other individuals and seek assistance, but you also have to have your entire life uprooted in this way that you would have never maybe imagined even last week or 5 years ago, or when you first looked into that individual's eyes and fell in love. It's just recognizing that domestic violence and those types of relationships don't start that way. It is love and romance in the beginning, and it can really just deteriorate into this truly violent situation. That when people are fleeing, they're fleeing violence. They aren't fleeing just a relationship. And I think that there's so many pieces of that when we're talking about why didn't they just leave? Like, that is something that so often comes up. Even people who've read Breath, people get really frustrated with Mom. But
and one of the heartbreaking things about this story is that she had left.
Yeah.
And so, right.
Exactly.
She had, in fact, like, you can't blame her for not doing that, because she had done that already.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I feel like and I think going off of that, what you're talking about, Lynn, is there's just so much of this book. Like, I've read this book multiple times because I love it so much, and it makes me cry every single time, and it hits me in a different way, and like it gets in it, like I get something new out of it every single time. And what I mean, I guess I'm to say, like, I think we'll just have like a little bit of spoilers in here, just so we can talk a little bit more freely about some of the particular issues and examples that are that are shown in the book, but how she drives home with Ellie, and then she sees the car, and how she's driving around for a long time, and Ellie's not understanding what's going on, and how she even hovers at the police station for a little bit, and then drives back, and then like slowly opens the door, and like it was just so raw in the way seeing how she left, and then tried to leave again, or tried to reach out for help again, and it was just, and you know, of course the mattress is another instance of that, which completely like broke me, but yeah.
I think you bring up a good point. A lot of times, one of the most dangerous times for people is when they leave, right? So when there's so many things to be considering when you are considering leaving an abusive relationship, and that's always got to be one of the things, right? What if I try to leave and it gets worse, right? Because now I've tried to leave, and of course that's going to upset the abusive person. And I think that's like a really big like cost benefit, you know, that survivors have to weigh, and that's completely on their shoulders. You know, with that isolation that comes along with it, you know, just like everyone else was saying.
Absolutely. And I think that with leaving, you mentioned a TV show, Isabella. I'm going to mention a movie because I was really surprised. I sat down to watch Invisible Man with my husband, and I didn't really know what the movie was going to be about or anything. But Elizabeth Moss portrayed a woman fleeing a domestically violent situation. And I thought she just portrayed the considerations and the level of fear and the PTSD that happens afterwards. And I think that when someone is leaving, I actually had a conversation yesterday for an event, and we were saying we have to truly reframe is that these people are warriors, these people are survivors, these people have, with everything on the line, have risked freedom and to escape these situations, and they really should be given so much reverence for what they have done. And I think if we were able to flood the narrative with that, then people would feel more secure coming out as a survivor and as a person that could help other people. Like the advocacy center, like the shelter that Martina is involved with, I didn't even know the kind of resources that were available, and the fact that the safe house is an anonymous place with no address, so it can't be Googled, like things like that. That there's just so many nuances to this, and I think that people who are in these situations need to know that there are other people who are deeply supportive and passionate about helping them, and to seek out that help. And know that they may feel completely isolated, but there are people that have gone through this, and they are not alone in moving forward if they seek out some of that support, even beyond any circle that they currently know. There are other circles that are there for support.
So do you want to go back then to the trauma piece, like some of the impacts and of living with the domestic violence, and also then like thinking a little bit about like how I know, Martina, you and Andrea both are advocates. Like how do people then to recover from the trauma?
I can start. I know that for me, so I work, so I manage a 24-hour hotline along with working inside of the safe house. And so with me, like my clients have like actively fled, and like we'll assist them to getting to our safe house. And then they have case management. They have different, basically, like everything from like where can we get a job to also like getting counseling. Like one of the most important things is recognizing that counseling can be and is so necessary, and that with things like, I know that with myself, with my own like PTSD, it's like, it is truly something that you have to work through. And so it's so amazing that I know that within our organization, we have counseling for adults, but then we also have it for little kiddos to do play therapy, and we have art therapy, there's acupuncture, like there's all these kinds of like counseling and holistic method alternatives that are to provide that complete comprehensive plan for health and for like individual success to overcome trauma. So I think that it needs to be tackled in a multidimensional framework, because through just using one lens, it can be so difficult. But once you truly look at it as a dimensional framework, then you're able to move forward more and have people beside you rooting for you.
Yeah, I think that's such an important role of the advocate, right, is to help people get connected to all of those resources that they might not even be thinking of, because when you're in domestic violence, you're in survival mode, right? It's so hard to even think beyond anything but that, let alone, oh, there's this theater club that could be really great for my kiddo, but I can't even think about that because we're just trying to make it through day by day. I think of one of my clients that I've worked with for years that she's grown up in domestic violence, and for part of when we've been working together, mom and dad were still together. They've since separated and all that. But a big role in what I've been doing with her is getting her connected to camps, to especially right now during COVID, right? Like online things that she can do, and also just being someone to, when she's frustrated with what's happening, and saying, that's not fair, that doesn't make sense, and saying, you're exactly right, that wasn't fair and it wasn't okay, you're right.
I think that alone, just to feel validation and acknowledgement, is such a powerful, I think it's a very human thing to want to feel seen and to want to know that your pain is valid. And so often, Lynn, you mentioned it earlier, like sometimes you try to reach out to people and people don't listen, and people can diminish that instead of sitting back to witness you fully. They can diminish your experience and make it somehow inferior. And in terms of trauma, I think of with Ellie, there's a lot of a comparison around feeling almost claustrophobic. And I feel like that was something that I didn't even realize had been associated with the way we grew up. But it's something that I constantly would feel. And I know that there's certain things, there's things that need immediate attention, and there's things that are going to need persistent attention. And I think that knowing that, it makes people know that just because they need help doesn't mean that they're weak. It means that they're self-aware. And that so I think that piece will help people that are escaping those situations, help to bridge the divide in terms of the isolation, but also mental health. Because when we internalize things and don't have outlets for them, then it can deteriorate our mental health in devastating ways. And we want to avoid that. We want to be able for people who are leaving these situations to be able to live fulfilling and thriving lives and know that is a possibility for them.
And honestly, to just piggyback on a little bit of what you just said as far as like immediate and then persistent care, I think that with mental health, it is very often that people think, oh, something bad happens, you get some assistance, oh, now you're all better. Like, oh, you did good. Like, let's move on. Like, oh, and then it's like almost like, I think that a beautiful thing is that normalization of that as therapy being a continuous thing, because then you've already built that relationship with the person that you feel comfortable and the ability to discuss when things are not okay. Because with trauma, it's not just something that you can go into a workshop, come out, and never experience again.
Right.
Like, you can use coping mechanisms, but it's something that it is a roller coaster of, you don't know what could be a trigger for an individual. And so that consistency, that like immediate, and that consistency is so essential.
You know, when I also have read the book probably 3 or 4 times now, and as because my work is youth education, one of the things that I've thought as I've read it is that, you know, if Ellie had been able to talk with somebody more, and thinking about like the things that resonated so much with me, that you know, her wanting to run away, wanting to run outside, wanting to run away, wanting to just be, you know, like that freedom, but also feeling really claustrophobic and unable to breathe and trapped. You know, I thought, oh, if she had been able to talk with a counselor and to see like that's actually expected physiological responses and emotional responses to the fear and the violence control that she was living with. You know, that probably would have given her the space then to think about like tools that she could have learned to deal with that, instead of feeling so trapped by the situation and so hopeless by it. I think, you know, because we see her trying to find ways to get to the things that she's dreaming about, but then also being feeling alone in that, I think, or just overwhelmed by not knowing how to deal with being triggered or being traumatized or being afraid, even though all those things make sense in the situation.
And then that isolation continues, right? Because you feel alone with how you're feeling, right? Like, everyone else is doing this. Why can't I just do this? Like, what's wrong with me? Well, you know, because you've been through trauma and you've got to get some help for that.
Yeah.
Right. And like Martina was saying, normalizing counseling and continuous counseling. And for young people, like we were talking about the silence, and a lot of times young people, they're conditioned to say, you protect this family, right, and everyone else is enemy. And so, you know, and depending on what family you grew up in or what experiences you've had, there's warning and threat, like if you tell, this could happen. And to know that there are people in school systems, in communities, you know, there's so many different communities that they have someone that could be a safe person for them to reach out to, or to at least say what's going on. Because I think once the cat's out of the bag, then people can start to bring their own access, resources, wisdom to that situation. But that can't even happen until we know the problem, until we know what's happening. But I think if we start having these conversations in broad ways in school systems around mental health, around domestic violence, around a lot of these issues, and create opportunity for people, like what you do, Lynn, with youth education, like really incorporating that into different places where young people will be, that opportunity could lead to so much. And I think that that's such important work.
I think one of the things I really appreciate about being at the Advocacy Center is that we are an agency that has we have 5 people on our education department. So we have a really large education department that's able to work then with the advocates. And because I think one of the things, you know, this is something that I feel like often, like one of the key messages when I was in a classroom was also helping students to understand why this is important for them. And some of that, and I know that in every classroom there's, and I often say this, I know that some of the students there have heard about domestic violence maybe, or about dating abuse just in the news, or they've read books and seen movies and TV shows. Like we have there are also going to be some students who have personal experience with the things that we're talking about. And then there are going to be students where the whole conversation feels really uncomfortable because maybe they've never talked about this before or experienced it. But part of what I want them to do is to be able to let go of some of the assumptions about like who would experience, like that domestic violence only affects certain kinds of families. And, and so then none of my friends maybe are experiencing this, or my friends won't believe that I'm experiencing this because maybe my family doesn't fit some of the stereotypes or what they've seen in that TV show. So, I do think there's this piece maybe of like who we think is impacted by domestic violence.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There is so much assumptions. There's so many myths. There's so much just negative chatter around what it means to be from a home like that, or to be in a relationship like that. Because another part of it is like what we see in the book and what we've mentioned is the fact that these relationships don't start this way. The majority of the time, they start violent. And relationships can appear deeply loving, but still have very tragic secrets to it. And we need to be aware of that.
Frequently use the frog analogy when I'm talking about that with people, right? If you put a frog in a pot of boiling water, it's going to hop right out and it'll be fine. But if you put it in like a normal temperature, like room temperature pot, and then you slowly increase the heat over time, which we know domestic violence escalates over time, the frog's going to stay in there because it's not going to realize how hot it's going to get and that it can't survive it. And that's just always what comes to mind whenever we're thinking about that progression. And I think it's also, so often abusive people aren't abusive people to everybody in their lives, right? And so that further keeps the secrecy. Or if you do try to kind of test the waters and maybe start talking about it, like, oh, no way, that person would never do that. They're such a nice person. Of course not.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That was one of the things with the father in is that he, to other people, was gregarious or charismatic or known as like this great guy, but then he was a different person in his home. And I think that is so frequently the case, is that they don't put that face onto everyone. And so that contributes to that isolation, because the people in that home or in that situation are the only witnesses to that side.
And in continuation of that, it's like the isolation is so, like, it can be so dramatic in that it's like you're not even able to leave to have the opportunity to recognize that it isn't normal. Like that not being able to leave or not being able to do this or not being able to do that, like you just think that is normal because if that's your upbringing, then that's your upbringing. And so it's almost as if like that's how you're raised, and then you start branching out and start learning these things and come back and start to question what is occurring, maybe even in your own home. It is just that much more of that isolation potentially from the other individual in the house, to be like not wanting you to leave more because you're getting this information or potentially these resources. I know that for me, I'll get phone calls at 4 a.m. and it'll be someone saying that, like, I think that everyone's asleep, and whispering to me on the phone about what's going on. And it's just so, it's just like that's the level. Like they can't leave their home to make the phone call. They're making that phone call in their home at 4 a.m. when they hope that no one else can hear them.
Definitely. We also have a 24-hour hotline, and I definitely get those calls too, especially right now during COVID, right? When so many people are having to social distance with people that are abusive.
I remember that was when we had our event, I think in May, we were talking about how during COVID, things like mental health, things like domestic violence, that those things can become so much worse in these circumstances, because a lot of times people have a little bit of a breather or of space or freedom when the intimate partner goes to work, or when you get to go to work, or whatever the dynamic is. And so COVID has just created also these conditions that can be very dangerous. And also, in terms of our conversation before, we talked about how all these parts of a person's life, their economic freedom, their physical freedom, like all of these pieces, and how domestic violence, it yearns to dominate all of it. And a lot of times we'll do it bit by bit. And so in Breath, one of the things was taking away his wife's ability to have a job. And then from there becomes a dependency. And then there becomes like a need for permission for any sort of freedom. Like, it happens over time. And with relationships, it's very important for young people, for adolescents, to know the warning signs going into dating and going into committed relationships. Because it starts out, like you said, it also often starts out with the romance, and then they ignore the warning signs.
Do you want to talk a little bit about, go ahead, Martina.
I know, I was just going to say, and something that Lynn was saying earlier, as far as like what we think it looks like, it's like, this doesn't discriminate. So this is happening in teen dating, as far as these abusive sexual patterns. These are happening to LGBTQ+ folks. This is happening to people of all races, all ethnicities, and all places of the world. This is happening to the elderly. This is happening to like all individuals. And this does not discriminate at all. And so these conversations need to be happening on all platforms, because they need the message to be spread to all individuals.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I was wondering if you four wanted to talk about the signs, because I think, especially since this video will be available for folks to watch afterhand, what are those signs? Because I think it's so important, and I think because there's so many misconceptions around domestic violence, around who it can happen to, how it happens, when it happens, I think that the signs, just like there are signs that they say for people who are maybe contemplating suicide, for example. There are a list of signs. What are those signs that we should be looking for?
Well, this is one of the first time I read the book, and then when Leah, who was interning with me, and I talked about it, we literally pulled out a power and control wheel, one of our handouts, and started pretty excitedly talking about all the examples from the book, A Breath Too Late, like, and how they lined up with different sections of the power and control wheel. But one that I remember that was like, when I was like, oh wow, like all these pieces are in here. I often, because you're right, Martina, like, it's not, I can't tell students like, be concerned about this kind of person, right? What I say is, think about the behaviors how are they treating you, and what are the behaviors? And I think to talk about even certainly violent behaviors are hard to imagine, like that I might be attracted to someone who's violent or abusive. Those feel like big labels. But if we start by talking about controlling behaviors, that's something that it's like, I can see where something might be controlling. And I remember in the book, there's a point where Ellie's father is getting her mom to change what she's wearing to work, because he doesn't want her wearing the skirts that she was wearing, I think it was. And just the way that it was like, it can be so manipulative too, because it can almost sometimes feel like, I care about how you look, but it's also, I want to control how you look so other people aren't looking at you, which is also then I kind of want to start isolating you and just, like, so something, just, I don't like it. I don't like that shirt, I think we should get rid of it, but there can be so many other layers to what's happening with that behavior. But
and I think it's hard too because, right, every abusive person does things a little different. So there's definitely common themes and, commonalities there, but the nuts and bolts of it can be very different. Something I frequently talk to my clients about is boundaries. And, because we set boundaries around everything, right? They encapsulate all those areas on the power and control wheel.
Yeah.
And I say, how someone responds to a boundary that you have set is such valuable. And there is no better information, in my opinion, about how to get a gauge of that, right? Is it someone that can, even if it's a hard boundary, can they hear it? It might be a hard conversation, but can they hear that? And can they respect that and try to take that into account and really listen and understand that? Or is it something different? Is there trying to exercise control over that, right? And I think boundaries are just really important. That's a big tip off for me that I talk to people a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that what you said about boundaries is just, I'm getting a lot of that. I have a friend who had a couple throughout the last week or so has been crashing on our couch because they're having an issue with someone they had a very brief relationship with, who's not respecting boundaries, who's kind of pushing their way past the apartment, climbing into bed with them while they're asleep, doing some really crazy things, and they're really, really scared about that. And you'll see the text messages and it'll just be just gray this, and one blue saying don't contact me again. It's just the boundaries. And I think that and going forward, that'll be something that even I'm looking for within my own relationships and my own friends' relationships, and that's just so important, and not something that I think even me that I would think that's the sign that I would look for. But now I think that boundaries is something that's so important. Even though we think about when people will say, "Oh, are you sure you should be wearing that?" which is something that Ellie's father did say, but it's also a boundary thing by going in and taking away her clothes and taking away the car. That's still a boundary issue. So yeah.
I think too, the boundaries is such a powerful way to frame it. And I think it's a very important conversation for all humans in general, because I think a lot of people struggle. I remember having this conversation, and people are so used to lukewarm boundaries or passive direction or passive communication that anything clear or anything firm they think of as aggressive. And we have to change that. We have to change that for all of us. But it is hearing the reaction or witnessing the reaction to a boundary is incredible. Also because every person operating on their own would have different boundaries, and it's respecting that is important. And then talking about the controlling behavior, I think especially until a person has that sense of boundary, that they really, really should put a lot of counseling, awareness, throw everything at that. That is so important for just life. But in terms of those controlling pieces, is to recognize that there are times when things are very small and they're seeing how far they can push it. And then if you set the boundary, what the reaction is. And then there comes a point where if you feel like your body, your freedom is in jeopardy or is threatened or is shoved into a corner, is almost made to give this much room, and the room is determined by the other person. Those are all very clear signs. And I think that especially for, this is true for everyone. I will say it's true for everyone, but we see a lot with young women, this need for permission to take up more space. And so to be able to know that, you deserve that space, and then you deserve to be able to hold those boundaries. Every person deserves that space. Every person deserves to hold that boundary. And anyone that cannot handle that needs to remove themselves from your life. You remove them, because that is something that would be very damaging in terms of holding on to that.
I truly want to echo what all of you all just said. And then two like keywords for me that I think are important are like manipulation and submission. So if you are having to no longer like no longer to go to your soccer practice because instead you're doing this, or you have to rechange your schedule because another individual is starting to dictate maybe what that schedule should look like, or they want you to be at this place so that they can see you, or they want to know exactly where you are at all times, and not in a like safety sort of way, but to know exactly who you're with. Like there's those sort of like manipulative components that I think are all part of the controlling and the boundaries and like all of those things. But in like actuality, I think it can look like clothing and the schedules and what somebody is allowed and no longer allowed to do by the individual. And whether that's voiced or actually put into action. Like if someone's even voicing that they want you to do this and you're no longer comfortable with it, and that can be just your boundary in of itself of not being comfortable with them even like stating that that's something you should do. So I think that it can really be seen on so many different levels.
Yeah. As you were talking, I was thinking about a conversation I had with one of the high school teachers that I knew, talking about their relationship when they were in high school, and saying it had been, I think the relationship lasted 3 or 4 years, and that afterwards they said, oh, I had lost so much of myself and given up so much of who I was because I wanted to hold on to this relationship. And I didn't even realize it until after we had broken up, until after I'd left that person, how much I had given away of the things that were important to me, about who I was or that I enjoyed doing. And I think that's what you're talking about, like both in like kind of being in that corner of the room, but also like submitting things, like saying like, or just let go of that to keep the other person happy. If I let go of that, then things are easier between us and we don't have conflict around it. And, and so for this idea of keeping the relationship happy, then, the ways in which people start letting go of things.
Yeah. And I think this section of our conversation is reminding me of I recently did an event with a woman named Kate Mann for her new book called Entitled. And her first book, maybe you've read, is called Down Girl, but Entitled was about the entitlement of men in so many different areas of life. She talks about the entitlement to sex, but also the entitlement to sort of domestic work, to just entitlement to power, to everything. And I was talking to her about everything, something happens in the world every single day, and I'm sure that there are so many things that you would wish to add to this, like add a chapter onto this book. And she said absolutely. And one of the things that she said was she wishes there had been a chapter about the entitlement to take up space. And I was like, wow, yes, like not just, and she was talking about not just going beyond just like man spreading or whatever. It's just the entitlement to take up space. And she talked a lot about this topic, and she mentioned a book called No Visible Bruises,
yes,
which maybe you've read, and maybe that's something you'd recommend. And she was talking a lot about that, and I was just thinking a lot about how space, which is also connected to boundaries, which I think is so great that you finally you voiced what that sort of put a term to that, Andrea, because I think it's connected to so many different things, including space.
So powerful. I went to a lecture that was all about that. It was what was body language and power, and a lot of it dealt with the more space that even you physically take up, shows confidence, and it shows boldness, and it shows comfort in that space. And yet we're socialized, like young women have been in the past socialized to sit very prim and proper and almost literally take as little space as possible.
Yeah.
And that even plays into the whole conversation about our bodies and what our bodies should look like and how much space our bodies should take up. And so being able to take up space and then create those boundaries is really such a beautiful lesson for us all to learn from children, from itty bitty children all the way up through our lives, and to continue to reinforce them. That's one of the things that requires persistent nurturing. And I think that if we could continue to have this conversation and in classrooms, like between parents and children, between friends, like that's a practice that I even have with our friends. Like, are you emotionally available for this right now? This requiring too much of you? Like, even those things, we can practice that in all of our relationships, and it can lead to really meaningful and productive and fulfilling relationships.
Yeah.
That's such a great point. I have been talking with a lot of educators about that it's important to be talking about the warning signs. Like, what are the warning signs of an unhealthy or abusive relationship? But so often people don't have an image of what a healthy relationship looks like. And, so I think, there is more conversation now about consent and not just sexual consent, but consent-based interactions in all areas of our lives, and teaching that to young kids. And I think that's really, those are like, we're now talking about what are healthy relationships? How can you really, take up space and be respectful, and how can we interact in ways that are based on really listening to each other, and so I think that as important as it is to be talking about the warning signs and to be talking about domestic violence and what does happen in abusive relationships, and how can we support people, we also like holding up a vision of and then what do healthy relationships look like? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
August is a great example as well.
I love August.
Right. Well,
I think he's a contrast to
yes.
I mean, not just as, when we're talking about these topics, but also thematically and from, a craft perspective, the way that he serves in contrast to the relationship that Ellie's mother has with her father. It's absolutely incredible writing.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think that that's really important, just like you're saying, Lynn, is to be able to show both, because you have to know, like an athlete, you need to know what you're training for. You need to know what you're aiming for.
Right.
And so then you can start to cultivate the practices, the behaviors, the mindset, the communication skill to be able to have that healthy relationship, because that is such a dynamic. It's a growth experience just to be in a healthy relationship, and so to honor that and to know what it looks like, because a lot of people do not have examples of that. Like my husband and I, we both said we do not have examples of what a healthy marriage looks like, but we want to create that for ourselves. So we may mess up because we're figuring it out, but then we keep trying to have that communication open, so that way we are always independent and fulfilled, but then always in partnership. I think that is a big also way of looking at relationships, is instead of this almost this very codependent, almost like you bleed into each other sort of thing that a lot of times we romanticize, is to say, no, you're two people. You're two people that are in partnership to have whatever life experiences you want to have. And the other piece of that is, I remember someone saying, I do not need someone to make me whole. I am whole on my own. I am looking for someone to complement my wholeness. So I think that's a really beautiful way of looking at it, is that we're all on this journey to become whole, fulfilled, thriving individuals. But when we find a relationship that supports that, that's absolutely beautiful.
Yeah. So because Buffalo Street Books is hosting this, and I know I read constantly, and I know Andrea also does. Do we want to maybe, like, Isabella, you mentioned No Visible Bruises, and I wanted to just kind of give a full title and an author shout out for that book. And then I'm wondering if, like, there are other books that we might suggest that people wanted to read more about domestic violence, if we have some favorite titles or things that we would recommend. No Visible Bruises, the subtitle is What We Don't Know About Domestic Violence Can Kill Us. And that was written by Rachel Louise Snyder, who is a journalist and really looking at domestic violence in the United States specifically. But so in terms of just, I guess, kind of the macro picture, but she also does have some stories, but really looking at our culture and law enforcement and systems of response to what she describes as the sort of hidden epidemic of domestic violence in our country. Do you have other books?
I know of another debut book that the major theme is domestic violence, and it's called If These Wings Could Fly. It's by Kiri, I think it's McCullough, but it's not McCullough, I think it's McCurry. But it's If These Wings Could Fly, and it is a 2020 debut. It came out in March. And we are actually doing a Instagram talk, she and I, later this month to talk about the themes of our book.
We'll definitely put that on our stories.
Oh, yeah, Kiri McCullough.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, I just looked it up for you.
Thank you.
Like that.
I always say her first name. I never say it.
I think one of my favorites is Eleanor in Park by Rainbow Rowell. It's another one where there's DV going on, and it centers on, very similarly, like it centers on the daughter, and then she has this relationship that is exactly that, right? It's that contrast. And it's really eye-opening just when you have that contrast, how much, you can pick up on.
Yeah, and another YA one that I know of, I've been meaning to read it. It's at home in Chicago. That I know it's called, I believe, What Kind of Girl? And I believe it follows like a high school student who called the principal's office with like a bruised face, and said that it was her boyfriend who did it. And then I think the book kind of follows a lot of different people who are commenting on what happened and on how, this could never have happened, he could never have done this and whatnot. And like, again, I haven't read it yet myself, so I can't speak to whether it, represents these issues in, the correct manner. But I know that book is out there. And just because I haven't read it doesn't mean that I can't say that it's out there and that maybe other people would like to read it.
Yeah, I'm adding it to my list. I love to read books that have domestic violence as one of the themes. Yeah. So, yeah. Yeah.
And then also, Rocky, I'm just curious, because I have no secret how much I just adore this book. Do you have anything you're working on right now that we can maybe expect?
Nothing that's under contract, but lots of things that are being written. And a lot of my stories deal with mental health or with sexual violence, and really looking at generational trauma in my own family and exploring that. But one thing that I did want to say, because it did come up in a recent interview, is people are asking, would you ever do a follow-up to Breath? And I don't think I could ever do the continuation of August's story. I feel like his story would be his own, but one thing in the future, someday I would want to write Regina's. And it might be for an adult market, but I would like to show what it is to disentangle yourself from that trauma, and to show what it is, the very messy experience that is to overcome deep, profound grief alongside it. And so that may be 20 years down the line, but that is a story that I definitely have in my heart.
We'll read it. I will definitely read that. I'll read anything you write. I know, Martina, you're a writer too. I know you've written a bunch of articles as well. So are there any recent articles that you've written, or?
I don't have any recent articles about domestic violence that I've written. That we are actually in the process of writing in a series around daughters of domestic violence. I do have articles around mental health and around writing responsibly for young adults in children's fiction around mental health and suicide, and we need diverse voices. And then I also am collaborating with Nora Shalloway Carpenter, because she has a novel that was grappling with mental health too. And we are doing an event later this month as well, talking about mental health themes in our book, because World Mental Health Day is on the 10th.
Yeah. And I also know from your bio, Martina, that you've written articles as well. And as Lynn was talking about, having seen the work that you did with body art, which is incredible. Is there anything you've written recently or not recently that we should all check out?
So I am actually, not written. I am currently in the process of writing, but it is not at all anything yet. But for me, I've been focusing a lot on my art. So this is my own form of healing and way of spreading awareness. And so I am an installation artist as well as a musician. And so I am going to be debuting a performance art piece later this month around the topic of domestic violence. And so this is going to be a virtual live performance that will be virtually shown basically due to COVID right now. But I still think that right now it is so essential to, still bring the arts to the community. And so that is really why I want to bring this performance. And this performance is really based off of the cycle of domestic violence and just that continuation and that day in and day out. So I'm really excited to be, doing a performance in this format, because I've never done it virtually before. But I do think that I'm very, very excited about it, and it should be later this month. And I'm going to be doing a talk on Laurel TV, which is my area. I'm from Maryland, about that as well.
Well, we'll have to get information about that, and then we can share it out on our social media. And since as a virtual event, we might be able to come. So
yeah,
we don't have to travel. So
definitely.
we might be able to watch. That would be great.
Yeah, I'm so glad that it's still happening, because one of the things that even during the time we're still doing so many virtual events, but one of the things that I was so glad about A Breath Too Late was during that time, because A Breath Too Late came out at the end of April, and right in the midst of when everyone was really in quarantine, and so many books are being pushed to to be coming out later in the year, even in 2021, and I was so glad that A Breath Too Late wasn't one of them, despite the fact that I so wish for you that you could have had the in-person events that you so deserved, but that this book was not being pushed because there were so many people that needed it, and that would need it even more during the times that we were in or still in, especially as Andrea was talking about earlier about how being in isolation with people who are abusive in this particular time has kind of heightened a lot of situations. And so I was so glad that that your art piece is still going to happen during this time, that this book is still able to come out. It's really great to see artists, writers, musicians, visual artists still, pursuing and persisting during this time, because we need them now more than ever.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, which may be a good time to say that I feel like there are a lot of events happening this October for domestic violence awareness, like this discussion, but also, art and music and discussions and Clothesline project showings that are happening virtually and all. And so I just really encourage people to, do a little searching on social media. You can follow the Advocacy Center at Advocacy TC and see some of the events that we're doing. But I know that there's agencies all across certainly across the United States that are doing different events this October. So.
Yeah, and going off of that, are there any particular events? Of course, Martina's installation.
Yes.
But are there any events that you two in particular would like to highlight that are happening, either nationally or in your regional areas?
Nothing comes to mind immediately, but is there anything for you?
As far as me, I do not have the dates in front of me, so I'd be very embarrassed if I was to
That's all right.
sounds off the top of my head, but my Instagram handle is Martina Maya-Callen. So it's MartinaMayaCallen. And so when I go and do things, I will post it there, and there will be correct dates instead of you getting very blushy right now because I realize I'm saying them wrong. But thank you for asking.
That's great. And I think nationally, if anyone's wanting to connect with an agency near them, the National Domestic Violence Hotline, we can give them a shout out. And that's if you just Google thehotline.org, it'll take you to their main page. And so they do have a national number, which is 1-800 number 799-SAFE, which is 7233. But I think they also have a listing of agencies, and so you could find a local agency through their page as well. And from there, probably find events that are happening this month and the rest of the year.
And that's another part of this it is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, but this conversation is for any time of year, and that this conversation needs to be happening all year long. And that's why incredible places like the Advocacy Center exists, and like yours, the Safe House where you work at. Like there's so many places and so many educators and so many advocates that are out in the world doing really important work year round.
Yes.
And so staying up and aware of them, just as people who want to help contribute and uplift this conversation wherever possible, but then also for the people who may happen upon it and really, really need it. So I just am so grateful for the work that you all have done. And this is one conversation, but I know that every single day you guys are at work making sure that people are seen and heard and supported, and that is such a powerful, powerful asset to this conversation.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful. And then I also want to state, though, like if anybody's in need of resources, Like there truly are multidimensional resources. So there are legal that can assist you. There is food pantries that can assist you. There are emergency safe houses. There are advocates. There are like call centers. There's ability for counseling. Like we truly are here. I know, like Andrea, it's potentially the same for you. Like we're here for that initial first call when you are maybe questioning, like, am I in a domestic violent relationship? You can call and have that conversation. You can do a screening. You can have these conversations with individuals, and you can say, have a different phone call that's, I need to leave. Like it truly, at any stage, there are people that are ready to help. And so it doesn't need to get to like fireworks, red alarm to recognize that assistance is needed. Calling and communicating as soon as possible is truly essential when it is possible.
Definitely. And so many, I mean, every advocate I know, we meet clients for wrap. So like you were saying, you can be questioning, you can be not sure, you can have no interest in leaving whatsoever, and we will still be there to talk to you and do whatever you think is helpful. It's not about, what I think is best or what I think is helpful. It's about the clients and the survivors, because they're the experts, right? At the end of the day, they are the experts in their experience. And yeah, we're here.
Yeah. Well, I guess to wrap things up, first, thank you so much to the Advocacy Center. You guys do incredible work 24/7. And we're also just so grateful that you not only serve the Tompkins County community, but that you also partner with us for our events.
Oh, well, thank you.
It's so important that your voices also be heard during events such as this. And then, of course, to Rocky and Martina, clearly brilliance runs in your family. So, of course, Martina's art installation will be during this month, and I'm sure all three of us will be there. But like she said, her Instagram is Martina Maya-Callen, and we'll be following you shortly as soon as I get off this call. Not call. I'm too used to Zoom.
Metaphorically speaking.
I'm too used to Zoom at this point. And Zoom calls. Okay. And then, of course, Rocky's book, A Breath Too Late, is out now. Of course, you can get it from Buffalo Street Books, but also anywhere that sells books. And we do have one signed copy left at Buffalo Street Books. And it's a signed copy, but it also has this gorgeous bookmark. You can see it says "Hold On to Hope," and it's also signed. So we have one copy left. So you can either come in and get that, or if you live out of state, you can give us an email at events@buffalostreetbooks.com, and we can likely ship it to you. But yes, if you have not yet picked up a copy of this book, please do so. It will change your life. And yes, that's all I have to say. Lynn, Andrea, do you have?
No, thank you so much. I love this conversation.
Thank you. This was
Thank
wonderful.
you, everybody. Thank you so much for having me back, and thank you
Anytime.
for bringing on.
Yay,
It
yes.
was brilliant. And again, I love partnering with Buffalo Street Books and with the Advocacy Center. I think that this is such the perfect way to have these conversations when people do things in partnership. So thank you so much.
Yes, and so thank you so much for tuning in. And of course, this video will be available, so folks will be able to watch it at any point in time.
Share it out with other people.
Yes, and share it with other people, of course. And yeah, so thank you, everyone. We're going to end the broadcast now, but thank you, everyone, for being here.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.